Hello YouTube and welcome to a different video. This is the first video of a series of videos that will walk you through the process of making a game model of an AKM. This tutorial series should cover modeling, unwrapping, making high poly models, normal maps, texturing using old methods, and maybe some PBR if we get around to it. I will also tell you my preferred Blender settings for modeling firearms and how to set Blender up in such a way. In this video I will not cover animation and I may not cover PBR because I am not comfortable with either of those. But because of how easy it is to experiment with PBR using Sketchfab's model uploader viewer thingy-madoomaflotchy, we may get around to that. I feel there's an important disclaimer before I begin the video. I am not a professional 3D artist. I am a self-taught 3D artist that has gotten very comfortable with Blender over the past 4 years or so. I may do things that will make you cringe hard. There will be many triangles and things that you disagree with or which are just plain wrong either in your eyes or which actually are wrong. This is as much a learning experience for me as I hope it will be for other people. I'll teach you what I know, and if there's information that you want to spread, you can either leave a comment or you can make a video response if anyone does that anymore. Secondly, this video is made with the assumption that the viewers have some basic knowledge of the program. For the first few episodes, I may say exactly what shortcuts I am using, and I may not. If I forget to say, I also have screencast keys enabled, but screencast keys is not without its faults. Sometimes it'll glitch out and either not display anything, or display information which is wrong. If I fail and if screencast keys fails, mention it in the comments, and once the situation is resolved I'll leave an annotation. So yes, there's your warning to not watch this video on mobile devices unless sometime in the future they get annotation support. I don't want to repeat the basics in later videos, so as the series progresses it will become increasingly more boring as I have less and less to say, unless you're entertained by me droning on for countless hours. Finally, included in the description are some resources for your convenience. Most reference images I use in this video can be found in a download in the description. Any links I would like you to go to will also be found there. Some textures I use will not be included in the description for various reasons. Most of the time it's because I own them, and sometimes it's because I don't own them and I don't want to be a scumbag. And just one more note, this video, and especially the later videos, will be incredibly dry. I do not wish to include music in any of these videos due to copyright issues. If you have your own playlists, play them. If anyone happens to like this series, you can thank Tiago from Drunken Lizard Games and Millennia, or I don't know how to say his old username, it's on the screen now. These YouTubers inspired me to even begin 3D modeling. Without them I'd be even less qualified than I am now. This is the first episode, so we'll begin with baby steps. In the first video we won't actually do any work in the program, that comes later. In this episode I'll be going over what makes reference pictures good and bad, and helping you pick out reference pictures. I'll use the references that I have collected over time as examples in this video, and others in the series. In the description you'll find a folder or some sort of file that contains all of these reference pictures. Once again, I do want to be careful about this because I don't own them. If any of the owners of these images disagree with their use, please let me know and the link will be removed. I am not trying to cause trouble. With that out of the way, my hope is that you'll use this information to get your own reference pictures, but in case you have bad luck or you're feeling lazy, once again you can find them in the description. More pictures will certainly be necessary as time goes on. Sometimes it will be difficult to know what you need beforehand, so I want to teach you all how to find these pictures in case such a situation ever arises. Now, in my own little world, there are two different kinds of reference pictures: schematics and actual pictures. A schematic is a drawing, which is a blueprint of a part, and a picture is something actually taken with a camera, so on and so forth, kind of self-explanatory. Now we will observe the pros and cons of each. You may ask what schematics are good for. They're useful for making sure that parts are modeled correctly. They're useful for seeing things which are normally hidden behind other objects. And both a pro and a con, they require some firearm knowledge. Now what makes schematics bad? Sometimes they're cluttered, sometimes they're hard to find, and sometimes it's hard to explain why you have blueprints for gun parts on your computer. Now we'll look at pictures. What makes pictures good? Pictures are good for making sure things look the way they should, because you can see how light reacts. And another thing that makes them good is you can see how parts should look and fit together relative to each other. So what's bad about pictures? Well, number one, perspective is an issue, and if you don't know what it is, you can see a nice little image on the screen right now that'll show you why it's the worst thing in the history of ever. Another con is that light can make things appear differently than they are, or light can obscure small details. And one last con is that photos can be taken at odd angles. Sometimes this is useful, but other times it is very annoying. In order to search for references, you need to think of your modeling process in advance. My process is to find a very large and simple part of the gun and model it first. Since this is the first part of the gun, I need to keep in mind that every other part will be influenced by how accurate this part is. I'll start by looking at reference pictures of the gun taken from the sides. I'll make sure they have little to no issues with perspective. Obviously the issue will never be completely eliminated, but you want to get as close as you possibly can. Once I'm sure that perspective is not an issue, I'll make sure that the pictures aren't taken from an odd angle. If the pictures are good, I'll save them. Next, look over the pictures and find which part you feel is both largest and simplest. For the sake of accuracy, you should also find a picture from the other side of the gun. This way you are able to model parts which are not symmetrical. Personally, I chose the AK receiver. It's this part that's highlighted. Next, I'll find the schematic of the part which I decided was both large and simple. This is the part that I will model first, so I want to make sure it's as correct as possible. I'll find a schematic that I can actually read and save that. This is a schematic I saved. The last pictures I search for are pictures of the guns from off angles to see how light interacts with the parts. I'd like to say that you can never have too many references, but when you start to collect so many, there's a high chance that you'll collect pictures of different variants. So if you do take a lot, make sure that you're knowledgeable if you want your model to be super correct. If you don't care, then good for you. Now that you have found pictures, look over all of them. Think about how they'll fit into the process. These are the things I keep in my mind when looking over my references. When I start modeling, I'll begin with the part I have the schematic for. Since I have the schematic, I shouldn't have to worry too much about it being correct, but I'll always compare it to the pictures I found just to be sure. Compare your schematic to your pictures now. If the picture and the schematic contradict each other, I will sooner question the picture. I will run through this little checklist to see which I would rather believe. Is the picture distorted? Is the power of perspective too strong? And is the light influencing how the part looks? These questions are things with no clear answer. You have to think about them. If the answer is no for most of those questions, then it likely means that the picture is something you should lean more toward. If the answers are yes to those questions, then definitely stick with the schematic, and also find yourself a new reference picture. After the first part is complete, I will switch from the schematic to the full-side picture of the gun. This is the photo I will try to use for everything else. Usually, you can figure out how a part is shaped by using common sense and seeing how light behaves. Look through your side pictures now. If you run into any issues where you aren't certain about the geometry of a part, see if you have an off-angle picture which clearly shows the correct geometry of the part. If you don't, search for that one or find a schematic of the part. If you're satisfied with your references, you are ready for the next episode. If not, search more and check them. Repeat until ready. Before you go, these are the exact pictures I chose and why I chose them. The first image you'll see is the right side of an AKM, and the second image that you'll see is the left side of the AKM. I picked these pictures because the power of perspective isn't too horribly strong in them, and as I said earlier, you should have a picture of each side because guns aren't always symmetrical. There are ejection ports and controls on one side that you won't find on the other. Both of these images are at different scales and different resolutions, so they won't line up perfectly in the Blender. There's a workaround to fix this. It involves scaling an object in object mode to keep every part in proportion to each other, and then making the change in edit mode, and then returning to object mode to undo the scaling. If you don't quite get what I mean, like I said, you'll see it later. The third image I chose is a schematic for the receiver. I picked this part because, as I said earlier, I'll be starting with the receiver. The fourth image I chose is a picture of the receiver. This will help get the lighting and bevels right. The fifth image I chose is the schematic for the curve of the dust cover. I personally know that this is very hard to get right, and while I don't mean to attack anyone, I won't be showing any models that people have made, but a lot of people get this wrong and it triggers me every time. The schematic was very hard to find, and once you build an AK dust cover right, you'll be able to appreciate just how wrong most of them are, and I hope you'll really appreciate this schematic that I spent years getting. I suppose if someone was kind and took a real AK dust cover and just made a cutaway of it and then took a picture of that, that would have been very useful, but that never happened. Moving on from the dust cover schematic, we have the dust cover picture. This will help you make sure the lighting is correct. Next, we have another picture of the dust cover near the bolt carrier. This is once again to make sure the lighting is right. The next picture we have is of the wooden furniture on the AK. Of course, you don't have to put wooden furniture, but that's what I always like to start with, and then you can model aftermarket rails if you know what you're getting into. Next, we have the gas tube, which is in the region of the handguards. That's why it was ordered next. Images beyond this point aren't really ordered in any specific way. I just kind of got bored and decided to attempt something. Next, we have photos of AK barrels so that you can see at what part the profile changes in relation to other parts. For example, the gas block, the front sight post, and the gas tube, and the rear sight base. Next, we have a photograph of the rear sight base, along with the takedown lever for the gas tube. Next, we have the handguard cap for the lower handguard. You can see specific versions of the AK here, the AK-74, the AK-47, and the AKM. Because we're building an AKM, we're going to be using the AKM one. Next, we have an airsoft scope mount. It goes on the left side of the gun. You've probably seen it in a game like Battlefield, for example. This is only present on the AKMN. I'm going to put it on an AKM anyway because I want to have the customization available to the player. Customization is good. Next, we have one picture of the front trunnion. Next, we have another picture of the front trunnion. Now you can see a picture of the fire selector. It is followed by a close-up picture of the fire selector markings. As the fire selector travels down, it'll reach fully automatic first, then semi-automatic. Next, you'll have a photo of two magazines, one very worn and one only slightly worn. I didn't want to put this in the where folder, so I figured I'd put it here because it was useful both for where and to make sure the magazine geometry was correct. And this is the point where I got lazy and stopped numbering my pictures. Here you can see a picture of the rear sight base in order to get the thickness of the part in relation to the trunnion and receiver and handguard correct. You can also see the rear sight. Next we have a photograph of the rear sight. Measurements are taken in inches, so keep that in mind. Here we have a picture of the airsoft recoil spring and the button. This picture is mostly for the button. Next we have a picture of the front trunnion as it rests in the receiver. This is very good to make sure fitment is correct. Next we have a picture of the trigger on an airsoft AK. I chose this picture because oftentimes it's hard to find the way the trigger guard and magazine release all fit into the receiver and the way the trigger fits into the receiver. It's also difficult to find how thick the grip should be. Because this is a gas blowback AKM, it doesn't need the grip to be modified in order to fit a motor. I figured this was a good comparison because of that reason. Next we have a picture that includes 3 kinds of AK grips. You can see the AK-47 grips mounted on an RPK, you can see the AKM grips mounted on an AKM, and you can see Yugoslavian grips mounted on whatever that thing is. If we look at the pictures of wear and off angles, we can notice a Khyber Pass AKM which has some nice wear detail on it, and we have another picture of an AK that I should definitely know the name of, but I don't. You can notice that it has some nice wear, but a different kind. The first picture had chipped off paint, this one has kind of rubbed off finish. Those are all the reference pictures I chose and either why I chose them or what they are. As I've modeled about 5 AKMs, I definitely know that they come in handy, so please keep them around. Or don't. I realize this episode was kind of boring, but I'm teaching you important things and it's definitely an important first step to at least obtain reference pictures even if you don't know how to find some of them for yourself. I really hope you'll join us for the second episode, and I've already released it at the same time as this episode as I do realize some people will probably be itching to get into the program. Thanks for watching and I hope to see you there.